I took the sin out of this sermon, so now it's just about hope and justice. I'm going to talk about the state budget debate this morning. I'll be as respectful as possible, knowing that there are a variety of opinions about what's going on right now. I want to share a hopeful experience that I've had, and then talk about how I think the biblical understanding of justice applies to this debate. Before I begin, I need to fully disclose my background, for those of you who don't know. That way you can slice and dice my biases. I'm the son of two public school teachers. My father was often the lead negotiator for the teachers in my school, which I knew growing up, but I didn't realize that my teachers were actually, or my parents were in unions until I was in college. I didn't make that connection. I knew that the workers at the meat packing plant who went on strike every once in a while were in unions, but I didn't know my parents were. We never talked about it. But I'm well aware that I benefited from the salaries and benefits that the taxpayers provided my parents. My parents' good insurance got me through 3 hospital stays during college, and their help, plus scholarships and cheap public school tuition, allowed me to graduate from college debt-free, which has made a big difference in my life. Iowa taxpayers helped me out, and I'm grateful for that. So I'll say that first. The Circus Museum in Baraboo has nothing on the political mess that we've been witnessing these last few weeks. One of the saddest developments is how quickly and how deeply the state has divided itself once again, but this time it's even deeper. I want to share an experience that gave me hope for a political discourse, and this was my encounter with our Senator, Dale Schultz. On Friday, February 25th, I had the opportunity to visit Dale Schultz's office with 8 other clergy from Schultz's district. There were 2 Catholic nuns, 3 Lutherans, an evangelical, an Episcopalian, and myself. The senator wasn't available, so we spoke with a member of his staff. We all shared our thoughts about the bill, and I shared that at Plymouth Council the night before, 3 of the 8 people around the table were going to be directly affected by the bill, and they were anxious about the future. I also expressed concern that only public employees and the poor were being asked to make sacrifices to meet the budget deficit, and meanwhile the wealthiest in our state weren't being asked to give anything extra. Well, the staffer listened carefully to all of our concerns or support of the bill. There was one among us who was very much in support of the bill. And then the staffer gave us his analysis of the situation. He also shared Senator Schultz's efforts to work out some compromise. At the end of the meeting, I invited the senator to a forum that was to be held the next Monday at the Dodgeville High School. I handed him a sheet about it, but I fully expected that the senator wouldn't be able to attend the event. I'd been asked to serve on a panel for this forum, and so when I arrived that Monday, I was surprised to find out that Senator Schultz was indeed there. I ended up moderating the event, so I had the chance to talk with the senator a little bit. We had some nice small talk. He thought I sure looked young to be a pastor, and I told him I'd never heard that before. I was impressed with him, though. First of all, he displayed a great deal of courage to be there at all that night. He knew he was going to receive an earful, and he did. But he was there, and he listened, and people noticed and thanked him for it. The senator made clear to me that he wanted everyone to know he would stay as long as possible within reason to hear everyone out. And he did that too. The forum started at 6:15. The last person commented just before 9 o'clock. And then Schultz spoke until about 9:15. And then he stayed and he talked with people who wanted to speak with him directly. When I left at 9:45, he was still meeting with people who had gathered that night. Now, besides listening, that night he spoke thoughtfully and carefully. When he spoke at the end, the crowd was exhausted after this 3 hours of pouring out emotion surrounding this bill. But if he had spoken disrespectfully, despite the fact they were tired, the crowd would have been riled up very quickly again. However, his rhetoric was disarming, literally. He found some places where he agreed with the sentiments of the crowd, but largely he defended his party's point of view. He disagreed, mostly, but the way he did it allowed for a civil exchange. And at the end of that night, I don't think there was anyone at that forum who thought they'd convince the senator to vote no on this budget repair bill, based on what he'd said. But I think almost everyone felt heard and respected and believed the spirit of democracy had been upheld, at least in this forum. This debate isn't only a strain on our democracy, it's a strain on family relationships and friendships and working relationships. People are being defriended on Facebook, and God have mercy, now the pastor's spouting off about this at church. Oh. But it's possible for us to have civil debate about this. I've seen it. It's possible for our elected representatives to model how democracy should work. I've seen it. As long as I've seen these things happen, I will have hope that it can happen again, even in Madison, even in our conversations with one another, as heated as they might get. Our faith is about trusting in the glimmers of hope that we see, because we believe God is there, and God is more powerful than we know. When we treat one another with love, listening carefully to them, responding with care and respect, in return, good things happen. Sometimes God even moves mountains. At the forum that night, I shared that there are 13 Christian denominations that have statements in support of collective bargaining rights. These denominations include the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, the Episcopalian Church, the United Methodist Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and the United Church of Christ, too. In 1986, the Catholic Conference of Bishops wrote this: No one may deny the right to organize without attacking human dignity itself. Therefore, we firmly oppose organized efforts, such as those regrettably seen in this country, to break existing unions or prevent workers from organizing. As this debate is swirling around, I think it's helpful to know what a large portion of the church has been saying about this issue, not just right now, but over the last few decades. For me, the most significant issue surrounding this conversation is the rise of inequality that's been happening in our country over the last few decades. This mirrors what was happening in biblical times, and the prophets responded to the development in their times with an unequivocal no. Thus saith the Lord, knock it off, the prophets said over and over and over again. In ancient Israel, the land was the primary source of wealth, and the land was seen as a gift from God, and God was seen as the true owner of the land. Each of the 12 tribes of Israel received a portion of the land allotted to them so that according to their size and their need. And then the tribes of Israel each allocated the land as equitably as possible among the members of their tribe, among the families of the tribe. And if someone lost their inheritance of land, or nahala, there were laws that ensured the land could be restored to them. Leviticus 25:23 through 24 says, The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. With me you are but aliens and tenants. Throughout the land that you hold, you shall provide for the redemption of the land. Now, providing for the redemption of the land was an opportunity for those who had lost their land due to debt or misfortune to get it back. So if you happen to pick up a piece of land for yourself, you couldn't hold on to it forever. At some point, you were going to have to offer that land back to the person who had to give it to you. So we see in the Bible laws in place to keep the distribution of wealth as equal as possible. Well, this was all before the monarchy, all before the rise of kingship. So in the first 5 books of the Bible and Joshua and Judges, there are no kings in ancient Israel, only tribal leaders. But then with 1st and 2nd Samuel, you see the rise of kingship. And suddenly Israel says, we need a king. We're not like everybody else. And so we have Saul, and then we have David, and then we have Solomon. But with kingship comes problems. Wealth starts to become concentrated in the hands of the few. Scholar Bruce Birch writes this: The people's land was now used to reward royal service and was accumulated as the basis of a new wealthy class. This meant the loss of inheritance to those deprived of land. Traditional Israelite society depended on small family-based agricultural plots organized around villages, with common land held for grazing and water. Loss of family land or loss of common land raised serious concerns for material welfare and reduced many to poverty. So in other words, the kings came in and they started taking people's land because they could. And they kept it for themselves, or they gave it to one of their buddies, and then the people started starving. Well, the prophets see this, and they raise a ruckus. Micah 2, 1-2 says, "Alas for those who devise wickedness and evil deeds on their beds. When the morning dawns, they perform it because it is in their power. They covet fields and seize them, houses and take them away. They oppress householder and house, people and their inheritance." Isaiah 5:8 says this, "Ah, you who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is room for no one but you, and you are left to live alone in the midst of the land." Here's a picture of the king taking all the land and wealth for himself and pushing the people off. The prophets proclaim God's judgment on this concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. Isaiah chapter 1 says this, "Hear the word of the Lord. When you stretch out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves. Make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Rescue the oppressed. Defend the orphan. Plead for the widow." This biblical history is not the same as our own, obviously, but there are parallels in our country. I'm going to throw out some statistics here. Mine are from Tower Street Research, which compiled them from Census Bureau reports, the Congressional Budget Office, and papers and publications like the Quarterly Journal of Economics. Similar statistics are easy to find. In our country, in the 1920s, or the Roaring '20s, were a time of great inequality, historic inequality. We watched the musical Annie at our house a lot. And Annie is set just after the Roaring '20s, and Daddy Warbucks is a symbol of that era. In 1928, the top 1% of Americans claimed 23.9% of all taxable income, all pre-tax income. So the top 1% of those earning income were earning roughly a quarter of the nation's income in 1928. Now during the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and most of the 70s, that inequality decreased. So during these decades, the earners at the bottom, their incomes were raising faster than the incomes of those at the top. So in 1976, the top 1% of earners claimed 8.9% of pre-tax income, a big difference than the 23.9% of 1928. Well, in 1977, the year I was born, this trend reversed itself. And now, or recently, in 2007, the top 1% of earners again claimed 23.5% of our nation's income. The only year where they claimed more, the top 1% claimed more income was back in 1928. If we look at total wealth, the numbers are even greater. In 2007, the richest 1% of households in our country owned 33.8% of the country's private wealth. If we looked at a pie chart, the top 1% would own 1/3 of our wealth. The top 10% would own 2/3 of the nation's wealth. And the bottom 90% would own just about 1/3 of the nation's wealth. The Great Recession doesn't seem to be slowing the trend. Thursday, the State Journal reported that 199 billionaires were added to the ranks of billionaires worldwide. So our trajectory still seems to be towards greater inequality, not just in the nation, but in the world. The prophets proclaim that for God, justice means more equality and not less. My concern with the policies coming out of Madison is that they function to protect the wealth of the very wealthy in our state, while only asking sacrifices from the middle class and the poor. And this is not justice as the Bible understands it. Policies that would be addressing this rise in inequality would be a step towards justice. Policies that would be asking everyone to give something, make additional sacrifices, would be a step towards justice. Asking just the poor and a section of the middle class to make sacrifices is not justice as the Bible understands it, in my view. Well, after the prophets pronounced their judgment, they proclaimed the hope of a future king who will rule with justice and righteousness for all people. Isaiah 32 says, "Then justice will dwell in the wilderness and righteousness in the fruitful field. The effect of righteousness will be peace, and the result of righteousness will be quietness and trust forever." That sounds nice, doesn't it? Quietness and trust in elected leaders. May God lead us towards what is best for all of us. Amen.